Great. Well, good evening and welcome in. First off, I am your friendly reminder to please silence your cell phones. All right, I see phones coming out. Good sign. All right. So my name is Tiffany Wolf-Smith. I am Assistant Curator of Education here at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. And welcome to the Tuesday evening lecture series. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to do a quick push for next week. So again, same time, same place, be back here. Artist Linda Ridgeway will be here for this Tuesday evening presentation titled A Story and the Poet, Line by Line. Ridgeway ties together concepts, passions, and their sources within her evolving approach to art making. Ridgeway's work is currently on view. Hopefully many of you have already seen it. It's on the ground floor in the back, number 5 gallery. If you haven't seen it, make sure you check it out before next week to give yourself some context. So now on to this evening. Tonight we are lucky to have with us artist Justin Adian. Justin was born in Fort Worth, Texas, so he is a local fella. And he currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. And per a new acquisition in 2021, he is now represented in the Modern's permanent collection with his work Sidewinder from 2019. Adian received his BFA from the University of North Texas, so UNT, Mean Green, in 2000, before earning an MFA from Rutgers University in 2003 and going on to develop a significant international exhibition record. Adian has exhibited at galleries including Alman Reich Gallery in Paris and Brussels and New York, Lowell Ryan Projects in LA, Sean Horton Presents in Dallas, Half Gallery in New York, Scarstedt in London and New York, Rachel Uffner in New York, and Gagosian London in the UK. And look for his work at Alman Reich if you happen to be in Shanghai this winter. Be sure and check it out. Although I'm just learning from Justin, you'll have to quarantine for 2 weeks, so you have to really want to be there. I'm sure it would be worth the quarantine. So the fine line between painting and sculpture is especially blurred in the work of Adian, who produces abstract wall reliefs in vibrant palettes that fluctuate between and borrow from the two artistic languages. Justin has said about his work, "Sometimes I think about the paintings in terms of short stories. I have a real attraction to the way humans or anything organic push up against each other. It seems like a contradiction in contemporary art, but in terms of nature, everything is an object and organic." In a 2015 article from Interview magazine, the artist Richard Prince, who also collects Adian's work, has said, "Justin Adian's work is as good as a vinyl top of a 1969 Dodge Charger." I wish I could do Prince's voice. I don't know his voice, but Prince also notes Adian's ties to Texas. Adian lives in Brooklyn, but his Texas upbringing grounds his art. Prince goes on to explain that the artist credits the landscape and attitudes of Texas as influencing his unostentatious works. Adian is quoted as saying, "Within the Texas art community, there's always been a good place for humor." And knowing his Texas roots, I am not all surprised that his request for a post-lecture meal was enchiladas. And tonight, he will position the modern Sidewinder within the context of a career that began with those early days at UNT and continues with the same fervor, intelligence, and humor today. So please save up and pepper him with questions at the end, and join me in welcoming Justin Adian.
Okay. I would like to thank the Modern and Terry Thornton for inviting me to speak. I went to college at UNT, as Tiffany said. I had a good experience there with both faculty and my peers. I was also fortunate enough to work at the UNT Art Gallery with Diana Block. Working for her helped to demystify the gallery scene, working on exhibitions that included both John McCracken and Hill Snyder made the art world seem accessible. I graduated from UNT in 2000 and moved to Jersey City to attend grad school at Mason Gross School of Art at Rutgers. My practice is focused around shaped and painted wall works. While some of the works take their forms from other objects, most are shapes that I create. I work in a linear way, each new piece informed by the ones that came before it. Over the last 20 years, I've slowly added ideas, colors, and materials to my practice. I've structured this talk mostly chronologically, but I jump around to keep themes going. So the first images, the slides, or their quality is kind of bad because they're digitized from slides. In graduate school, I was making real minimal paintings with commercial latex paint. I was using mostly beige and whites with a few pastels. The paint was pre-mixed commercial paint made for interiors, colors created for domestic spaces. The beige was close to raw canvas. This allowed me to figure out my relationship with colors. In my second year, I wanted to move the composition away from the center of the canvas, which led me to making a stretcher with the corners cut off. I am comfortable making marks on a surface, but never really comfortable making shapes. Making a shaped canvas allowed me to create compositions without painting directly on a flat surface. After school, one of my professors, Tom Niskowski, helped me get a studio in the basement of his Chinatown building. And I was working full-time at Gagosian Gallery while making paintings in the studio. I found a crate of high-gloss oil enamel touch-up paints from Damien Hirst's studio. So I took those and took them to the studio and started using them there. In response, the stretchers got way more severe and tight. The effect was wrinkles and folds on the face of the paintings, which made me start to think about the paintings in terms of body issues. While the content of the work was still rooted in abstraction, the narrative started to come into play. In 2007, I saw this John Chamberlain sculpture at David Zwirner in a group show. I was only familiar with his crushed cars, and I really liked this work. It was made by just tying a piece of string around a sheet of foam. The whole sculpture is made trying to contain the foam. Then in 2009, I found a sheet of the same kind of material on the street and took it to the studio. And I tried to work with it, and eventually I landed on stretching it over foam, or stretching it over plywood, and then canvas over the foam. The first few looked like furniture, and furniture cushions, and then I moved on and made this piece. It's called Rumble. I made it directly after a rumble seat from an early hot rod. Rumble seats are tiny back seats that sit outside of the cab and fold up and down. After this, the work started moving to weirder spaces. The title of this one is Nobody Rides for Free, and it comes from a 60s slogan of grass, gas, or ass, nobody rides for free. And it's kind of about the little silver pieces hitching a ride somewhere, not knowing how they're going to pay for it. And this one is about a pushy third wheel. It's called Room for One More. The silver piece is wedging in, causing a split, making wrinkles and bends. I read a lot of short stories. I like stories that are about dealing with an everyday problem or issue. And the little silver wedge is an everyday problem. I've spent and continue to spend a lot of time watching paint dry. And so to get the drips just right, I have to hold these paintings at a slight angle and just watch the paint slowly run down. This one is called Slow Go. And I try to use as much of my materials as possible, never throwing away as little as possible. And this piece is made of scraps. Instead of making a bunch of multiple small pieces, I just piled them together in a scrap orgy and called it Big Finish. The first few years I lived in New York, I looked at a tremendous amount of art, both new and historical. Starting to work with new materials, I started to look deeper into the history of shaped work. Ellsworth Kelly, Robert Mangold, and Elizabeth Murray were the starting points, leading the way to artists like Lee Bonteque. I'm really drawn to her work, especially these pieces from the early 60s and 70s. They are both weirdly otherworldly and completely handmade. Lost my place. They're pretty far from traditional painting, but they're still framed and they're still hanging on the wall. I wanted to make use of all the sides of my pieces, and in thinking about this, I began to spray paint the backs of the works with neon spray paint to get a glow to seep out. I was still working at Gagosian Gallery in Chelsea, and the neighborhood has really good trash, so I found this back of a broken Ames chair, and I stretched foam and canvas over it and sprayed the back. The curve of the chair got the piece really far off the wall and let it cast a really bright pink shadow. The title of the piece is called Vert Glow. And after that, I made this piece. It's called Curtsy. The forms are straight knee bends. And then I thought purple is a really polite color and goes with the idea of curtsying. And then once I started using spray paint on the back, it kind of made its way around to the front. This piece is called ombre. Ombre is a term for shading from one color to another. That's kind of been co-opted by the fashion world, used on hair, fingernails, and clothes. But it's also used in the world of custom car culture when they do paint jobs. So this is kind of a sketch that starts the paintings. The paintings kind of change throughout their construction though. I use a jigsaw as the second way to draw when I'm cutting out the wood. Stretching the canvas, I use folds and wrinkles as lines. When I'm working, the stories of the pieces are being developed. This piece came out of the previous drawing. The title is Us. The piece is about a slightly toxic couple. The titles are certainly about the finished work, but they're also about the narrative of how the things got made, what I was thinking about, what I was looking at, what I was listening to while I was working on it. This piece is called Night Moves. I got there from an idea about 3 legs trying to grip the same thing. And then reading Lester Bangs writing about Bob Seger, and then listening to Bob Seger's song Night Moves. Scale also affects how I approach things. This is a small piece, it's 13 inches high. When I work small, I try to see how many things I can cram into it, both physical elements and painting elements. So the gray is automobile primer and the gold spray. In school, they kind of hammer into you not to use oil paint or water-based paint on top of oil paint. And so to get this effect, I used a water-based spray paint on top of a semi-wet oil-based spray paint. Sorry, this is my first lecture. Yeah. In 2014, I had my first show outside of the US in London. I called the show Strangers. I took the title from Larry McMurtry's book, All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, which he took from Merle Haggard's first record. I feel very close to the pieces when I'm working on them and while they're in my studio. Once they leave, I move on to the next thing. And then when I encounter my own work in the world, there's a distance between us. I'm not as close to them as I once was. And because of distance and time, I notice things about them I hadn't noticed before. At the best, they seem like a friendly ex, and at worst, just a juvenile, dumb mistake. Either way, they feel like strangers. This piece is titled Fortunate Son. The shape's kind of cross-like, and the neon glow adds sort of an aura. The work is titled Fortunate Son, based both on the shape of the thing and the CCR song. And this piece is a triptych. I titled it Neapolitan because whenever I think of a triptych, I think of Neapolitan ice cream. And the top of each form is spray painted with glitter spray paint, and the backs are painted with spray, so it has a real kind of saccharine, overly sweet color quality to it. In this work, the top and the bottom just don't quite add up, and the whole thing seems a bit off kilter, and it's called Bellini, because I also like thinking about this painting going to brunch. This is a real small work. It's 7 inches tall. The back's painted a little bit of spray, so there's a slight glow to it. It barely takes up any space, and it's a 2-piece, so it's called Bikini. And this work is made to be installed in a corner. I like making corner pieces because you can always get them into group shows. And they kind of get 2 walls. And because it exists between things, I called it Texarkana. Another artist who really influenced me is Blinky Palermo. This is one of his pieces from 1965. He was one of Joseph Beuys's students, along with Gerhard Richter, Anselm Kiefer, and Amy Knoebel. This is another one of Blinky's. What attracts me to his work is how simple and playful they are. There's a real economy of choice in them. In 2016, I decided to make a body of work that all dealt with the same ideas. The ideas I settled on were movement and gesture, with each component acting as a mark on the wall. They came out looking very lyrical and breezy. The first one is Wayfaring. I titled Wayfaring based on the song Wayfaring Stranger. This is the most upright of all of them. It's called Picket, kind of after a fence post, but it's spelled like Wilson Pickett's last name. This one is called Nuptials, and it's just about where things join and then fall apart. This body of work is the one that receives the most comparisons to other things. The most common comparison with this stuff was pool noodles, which I kind of liked because they're still playful about moving around. Except for this piece, which kept getting compared to French fries. But I think that's just because of the red. Looks like ketchup. And this piece is a bit different. It's called Rounders. And its movement, I was trying to just make it look like it was just spinning around on itself. As I was developing, this is Rounders, not the previous one, sorry. As I was developing my practice, I was also trying to figure out the context for it and where it fit into the contemporary art world. In 2004, I was working for an art handling and trucking company, and there I met the artist Blair Thurman. I immediately liked Blair's work, and we share some of the same interests, have similar approaches to making things, both of us making shaped wooden structures and stretching canvas over them. Blair kind of comes out of Swiss abstraction with artists like John Armleder, Olivia Massé, and Sylvie Fleury. In 2018, Blair and I did a 2-person show in Zurich. This is one of his. It's called Druid Mechanics, and I have no idea why it's called that. This one's called Pinky Ring, and that's one of Blair's as well. And this one's called Pinky Swear. It's one of mine. We didn't really talk to each other about what we were sending, so the titles worked out really well. This is another one of mine called Blue Note. This is one of Blair's called Jack-O-Lantern. This is one of mine called Chiclet, and it's about the candy because it kind of looks like little teeth. And this one's called Maybelline. And Maybelline, Great Lash is one of those things that the packaging and the branding are so iconic that whenever I see these two colors together, I think of Maybelline's mascara. And then Blair and I made a collaborative piece. I made the pink rectangle with the X, and Blair kind of made like a makeup mirror around it. We called the piece Fosse Bear after the choreographer Bob Fosse and the Muppet Fosse Bear. The other thing Blair did was he introduced me to his late friend Steve Perino's work. And I really, really got into Steve's work. There's something about it that there's like a latent and unaimed violence to it that I find really attractive. This piece is made out of a snapped aluminum panel with clear caulk in the center. I installed that my last year I was working at Gagosian. And then I made this piece in response to it called Never Break. It's about half the size of Steve's piece. And this is another one of Steve's works. It's another aluminum piece. And I made these kind of not as a remake, but you know, it was pretty influenced by his palette. It's called After the Glam Racket. Then in 2015, I opened a show in New York titled Fort Worth. The thinking behind this was where you come from, where you grew up, you can't ever get rid of it, whether you want to or not, and it keeps coming back up in things. And Dave Hickey wrote an essay kind of fleshing out that idea. This work is called Playback. The shapes taken and the name are both taken from a play button on a tape deck. And this one's called Orange Crush, and it's just because I like the turn of phrase Orange Crush for a drink, because there's no orange in it and nothing's crushed. And this was, it's called Fortune Teller, and it's just about those kids who make those fortune teller paper things. And there's a lot of, when artists go through breakups, they sometimes feel the need to make paintings trying to express their feelings, even if normally they don't make art about their feelings. So I wanted to make a painting about artists making breakup art. So that's this one. It's called Slow Goodbye, where the blue's just taking its time, moving, and it's causing all those wrinkles on the pink part. And this piece is called Outfeel, and it's just a strange, weird little wall piece. And another artist I've always really liked is Raymond Pettibone. He came up with the logo for Black Flag, so I made a painting from it, and I called it Slip It In, after the Black Flag record. Then in 2018, I stopped using foam and started using felt. So this allowed me to make the lines a little tighter, and I could paint the forms individually and then attach them. And in doing this, I could also make the depths of the forms different. So with this one, the green piece acts as an interior color shadow. It's much flatter than the white and the purple. The piece is called Aurora. This piece is called Brown Sugar. I like looking at baked goods too. They always sit well next to one another. And this piece is called Flare Side. 'Cause there's design elements and things that have nothing to do with me, but I find just weird and strange. And the notion of a step-side pickup truck I always found useless and ugly. So I made a piece about trying to waste space and not do much with it. And I called it Flare Side because that was Ford's answer to Chevy's step side. And this piece is called Satisfier, it's spelled with a Y, and it's kind of the same colors and shape off a sex toy. And I thought the painting looked pretty satisfied and kind of smug. And then, as was mentioned, I did a show in Dallas with Sean. And I've known Sean since we both lived in Denton, and since 1998 or so. I called the show Casual Encounters because the work all looks fun, like it's up for a good time. And this is the first piece from it. It's called Zigzag, and the structure was kind of based around thought bubbles just squared up. And the zigzag is referring to the blue back. This piece is called Rubble, and it's another piece made from discarded material from previous works. And I was just thinking about little stacks of rocks people make when they are walking around in the woods. This is Sidewinder. This is the piece in the Moderns collection. This piece, I was starting to think think back to the ideas of beige as the color of canvas, and one line indicating landscape and horizons. And I called it Sidewinder because the color takes everything down the side. It takes all the content and the motion of it down the side. This was the smallest piece in the show. It's just called Psychic. We hung it really high, and it just felt like it knew what we were thinking. It's 13 inches by 14 inches. And I've also, with this one, I've always watched a lot of cartoons. And with this piece, I felt like the blue was a cape hanging down, which got me thinking of the Powerpuff Girls. So it wound up being called Powder Puff. And then I started to move away from using the smaller pieces of wood to make exterior shadows to using them to make interior ones. This piece is called Hubba Bubba, after the bubble gum. And this one's Circus Cuddle. And those are the two colors of circus peanuts, those terrible little candies. And with this, I was using sort of the same idea, except to make a line on the interior and activate it as a landscape piece, like you were looking through a canyon. It's called the Arroyo. Using the idea, and a lot of the things I like and the colors I'm interested in come from the 1970s. And the palette of the next few works come out of what I imagine a 70s lounge would look like in a sci-fi movie. This piece is called Bachelor Pad. I'm also a big fan of the author Elmore Leonard, entitled this one Freaky Deaky, after one of his books. Elmore Leonard is a great writer who, for whatever reason, is regulated to genre fiction. His westerns are shelved in the western section, and his other works in mystery. Whereas authors like Larry McMurtry write a western and it gets shelved next to their other titles in literature. This high-low division has always struck me as unnecessary in the art cultures. This is another work whose title comes from low culture. It's called Cherry, after the 1970s adult magazine. In the early days of the magazine, it openly embraced selling sex, but was filled with counterculture and subversive lefty ideas. And red's always been a hard color for me because I feel like it gets a lot of attention without doing anything. So, like a car on a showroom floor. So I titled this one Camaro. So the previous works were getting real complicated and taking a lot. They were hiding how they were made, and they were doing things I didn't know were 100% necessary. So I started thinking about the ideas of joining the pieces together with joints similar to the way one joins furniture in woodwork. So this is the first one of those pieces. The white small joints are holding the brown in places while it sags, and it's called dipping, and it also reminded me of Copenhagen, the color of the dip. This is titled Playtime because it looks like a nursery painting. And this piece is held together by two little pink joints, keeping the third white panel at bay. It's called Key Party. And this painting is called High Test because to me it kind of looked like it might be fast or sporty. That's gone a little faster than I thought. So the last three images are what I'm working on now. The images aren't great because they're phone images. But when Sean told me Sidewinder made it to the modern, I went back to thinking about it and why I like it. I'm drawn to beiges and whites. I like the feeling of emptiness. I find it calming. I like the desert and the ocean and how sparse things can be. And I like how I get a similar feeling from Ad Reinhardt. This is the first painting I've made in this style. I titled it Enchanted Rock. This one's called Peach Creek. And this is the last image. It's called Blue Moon. Went a little faster than I thought. So any questions? Shoot.
What year are these last three?
They're in the last 4 months.
Oh.
They're big. They're between 75 and 80 inches wide.
Would you consider yourself a painter or a sculptor in mind?
I mean, I think of them as paintings. Like I really like this quote by Ambrose Bierce, and it's a painting is something you cover with a protective surface to protect it from the elements and expose it to critics. So I feel like if you paint something, it's a painting. And anything that hangs on the wall. I was really adamant about them being paintings for a long time, and then I started thinking about, like Elizabeth Murray, when she makes a painting, she doesn't do anything to the sides. She just leaves them raw and kind of bare. So there's just a straight face to her paintings. Like she doesn't care what angle you look at it. But then folks who paint the sides, like Joe Bear, like they're kind of in a way more sculptural than Elizabeth's work. So now I'm kind of at this spot where I think there's just not enough words to describe things. When McCracken is standing, freestanding, it's 100% sculpture, but as soon as it tips to the wall, it just changes. Like the plank pieces are just something else. So like working three-dimensionally, like they get treated as paintings, they get handled as paintings, but they get talked about however is convenient for the person talking about them. Shoot.
What was your motivation to move off of like the traditional canvas into more like painting substances?
You know, I think part of it was I could make these from the ground up. I could make the structures, I could stretch them. There was no set parameters for them, so there was no starting point. There was no idea of perfection or rectangle. So I had the freedom to be able to just create it from the bottom all the way to the top. Yeah.
On average, how long do you spend on a piece?
They're starting to take a real long time. The construction of them takes a lot. So that, and each coat takes a day for it to cure. So it's hard to say. I've gotten to where I work on 2 or 3 at the same time. But I don't keep a real normal timetable. So some days I'll work like 12 hours and some I'll just work 2. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned the one piece was you found a part of a chair.
Yeah.
Do you often find materials that you use, or are you kind of more constructing every single thing at this point?
I pretty much construct everything. I mean, I still find stuff and use it sometimes just because it's easier. But after bed bugs, trash got a little dicier in New York as well. And I didn't really want to make a painting and then have it wind up in someone's house and give them bed bugs.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
You're closer, go
I'm up
ahead.
front. So I'm really interested in how you talk about each individual work like a character.
Yeah.
It has a personality. And you had mentioned your kind of proclivity to read a lot of short stories. You
Sure.
mentioned some other favorite authors. As you approach constructing these, how does that meld together? Is it kind of reactionary? You come to it with a narrative, or are these things happening as you're building?
I come to it with the beginning of a narrative, and then it keeps happening. But lately I've started to realize that like I keep going with the narrative because I don't want to let the pieces go. I don't want to let them be finished yet because I know once the narrative is over, I'm done with them, which is a weird thing because I'm not really precious about work. Like I'm fine giving it away or like letting it out, but like once it's finished, but I don't want it to be over. So the narrative just keeps going.
Is there a sequence to it? Are they building off one another? Are you coming?
Sometimes. And sometimes it's just somebody's turn of phrase that I find hilarious, and I'll just start making something based on it. Or something really sad that I want to make kind of funny. Yeah. I mean, it's all pretty random, but they all have a relationship to one another. And I find that I've been making the same shapes for years. Like they keep popping back up.
So, very curious about your studio. Like a painting studio, you can expect to see canvases and like tubes of paint and stuff.
Sure.
What does your studio look like?
Well, it's funny because at some point I saw a video of Ed Ruscha working in his studio, and all the paintings were flat he was working on. So I decided that's the way I should work from there on out, and that was when I was like 22. So it's just a bunch of flat surfaces that I'm working on in a real tiny wood shop that I try to make them in. But it's paint and canvas everywhere. Yeah.
So you change your palettes between like the canvas, the foam, like the felt, right?
Well, the foam and the felt, the paints have stayed the same. I just lean more towards some of the wider ones.
Right, and so I call it your canvases.
Sure.
Painted on. So what other materials do you imagine you could experiment in the future?
I mean, I tried to make some of the paintings with fiberglass, but it was just brutal work.
Yeah.
The paint looked okay, but they looked a little like homemade surfboards in the end. And not in a good way. I think what I like about this oil enamel is it acts as a shell as well, not just paint. So it also makes the work pretty tough. It gives it a surface and a skin. I don't know what other paints I would use. I broke out some regular traditional oil paints a few years ago, and it just felt so tedious and time consuming.
Right. Well, like, do you want to follow the example like Duchamp of finding ready-made, found objects?
Yeah.
And making those?
I mean, really, I think things through with my hands. Like Duchamp was the kind of artist who probably never made a gesture he hadn't planned days before.
Right.
And for me, like I come to new materials just through actual labor. Yeah.
I'm curious about your paint application process.
It's just brushing coat after coat, but it's a real high gloss enamel. It's this Dutch paint made for their doors, which they're famous for making. They also have really great names like Van Gogh Yellow, and the bottom or one of the beiges is called Wooden Shoes. But the paint's real great because it's also self-leveling, so you lose a lot of brush marks unless you really go back into it when it's tacky. Yeah.
Does it have a strong odor?
Oh yeah, it's wildly toxic. Most states won't sell it, so you got to have a port in the city to sell it because it's also marine quality. So I'll make a bunch of things, paint, and then have to split just because it'll make you sick. Yeah.
Do your titles come to you as you're working? Do you have them in mind ahead of time or after you finish?
All of them. Like, it depends. Usually as I'm working, but sometimes I also keep a list of things I like, or when I hear somebody's turn a phrase, or if I read something I like. When I was in school, Vernon and Fisher really hammered into us that we should steal everything we like and use it unabashedly. And I try to keep that up. Okay.
So like not working within a frame. I mean, you talked about earlier how you wanted to shift the composition from the center, and that led to you like cutting the corner of the canvas. When you were younger, did you work kind of outside of the page or outside of a box? Like what led to that?
I think it was really just to kind of spite a professor, and then it worked out. It backfired, and it made me really want to explore moving around from just traditional painting. And I think I was also like sticking to my guns that they were painting, also out of some sort of trying to be resistant to like an art authority, which just made me wind up doing everything they said I was going to do and come to the same conclusions. Yeah.
So, do you ever have like friends over to your studio, or close associates? And when you do, what do they say about stuff inside your studio?
I mean, it depends. Like, weirdly, my peer group is full of a lot of narrative painters, which, we have different perspectives. And I've known them all for so long that you just wind up talking about one's progress and like old work and new work, and they're like conversations that have started 10 years ago and just keep on going. I mean, artists like Blair, he's about 15 years older than I am. So those are really good because, he'll bring up artists I don't know about who had like a moment like 1987. So, that always helps. All right.
Well, thanks, Justin.
Thank you.